This is Governor Larry Hogan, and I don't always have time to listen to podcasts, but I do enjoy listening to the Maryland Crabs podcast.
Live from a grungy kitchen table located in Annapolis, Maryland's scenic and historic capital, it's the Maryland Crabs podcast. With each episode, your hosts, Tim Hamilton, John Frenay, and the occasional guest will dive in and pick apart the stuff that really matters most to you. We're too lazy to actually solve any of these problems, but we can definitely stir the pot. From schools, politics, parking in the fire lane, to those horrible people who drive BMWs. And here with this week's episode, live from the kitchen table, Tim Hamilton and John Frenay.
Hey, and we're back here with the Maryland Crabs podcast. How are you, Tim?
Merlin. We talked about this last time, but you're turning into a real Marlander.
Merlin
for
Crabs.
A Philly guy.
Did you see that video?
Yeah.
That went viral where the guy in San Francisco, people said, "Oh, I'm tired of your accent," and he came back home for Christmas and held up the cards. Oh, it's great. He holds up cards with words like, okay, Baltimore. And he asks his family around the table, okay, pronounce that word. And they're like, Balmer. And it's like, down at the ocean.
Downey Ocean.
Downey Ocean. And it's like Bel Air Road. It's like Blair Road.
My son starts to pick the accent up, and it drives me nuts. Just a little bit.
That's funny.
Not really, but thanks for playing along.
Well, hey, I'll tell you what. Why don't we get right into it? Last week we talked with DaJuan Gay, who had the unfortunate skill, I don't know, to be stopped by the Annapolis Police Department for running a stop sign. Was detained a little bit longer than he felt was necessary, and actually he was concerned for what he was potentially looking at in a stop. And obviously there's some tensions between the police and the African-American community going on, not just here in Annapolis, but nationwide. And we wanted to go back and see what the other half of the story was.
And you did it on your own, too.
I did. I mean, there's always...
I was engaged, so you took over.
Does your wife know?
So I sent a text to Corporal Miguez, who is the spokesperson for the Annapolis.
Right. And she always sits in when we went and talked with Chief Scott Baker, and she always sits in on these things. And then when he starts to say something stupid or we start to get into an uncomfortable situation, she chimes in
or glares at us.
Right.
She sent me a text. She goes, "I want to talk to you about that incident you keep bringing up with the kids on Clay Street. So I think I'm about to get a talking to." Mm-hmm. Which is common with most women. She had used the same kind of tone in her text that my wife does, like after we were at a party. And she goes, "I'd like to talk to you about what you said last night in front of everyone."
Did she say it from her knitting?
From her knitting convention, yes.
That's why she wasn't there, by the way.
Corporal Amy Miguez is a knitter.
And that was front page in the Capitol.
Yeah, so we're not outing her.
There's no big secrets there, but we will out her. She was up in New York at a knitting convention.
So I pictured her texting me angrily with her. She's like angry, and her needles are clicking together angrily, and just what she's like, I'd like to speak to you.
Don't piss off somebody with knitting needles; they could pierce your eye.
She did a smiley face though.
Yeah.
But so I apologize for sending you in there unsupervised. She apologized for having the chief there unsupervised. So I listened to your side of it, the interview, while I edited it last night, and to be honest with you, I was impressed. So let's get into it, and we will dissect it in a few minutes when we come back.
Very few things in life are so precious and so irreplaceable that we all must do our part to protect them. The Chesapeake Bay is one of those things. You can do your part by contributing to the Chesapeake Bay and Endangered Species Fund. It's that little line item you'll see at the very end of your Maryland tax return. Any amount you give makes a difference, and it's tax deductible. I'm Peter Francho, Maryland Comptroller. Our bay and rivers thank you. Learn more about the Chesapeake Bay Trust at cbtrust.org.
Of all the ways our customers can describe us, nothing means more than being their favorite.
Zachary's is the gold standard in customer service.
This is the absolute best jewelry buying experience of my life.
The annual holiday party for their customers is beyond a memorable experience.
They have the most exquisite jewelry, and the store atmosphere, it's the best around.
They listen, and there's never any pressure to buy.
We've purchased fine jewelry from different big names in the Baltimore area, but we were treated like family at Zachary's.
You'll not find a nicer group of people. They have my business for life.
Best in Annapolis is simply not enough.
Zachary's has been a part of many of my life's best memories.
After it's all said and done, there's one jewelry store that's my absolute favorite.
Zachary's. Online at zacharysjewelers.com. More than a jewelry store, a jeweler.
We're back here with Chief Scott Baker, back at the Annapolis Police Department on Taylor Avenue. Once again, I am not in a jail cell. I am up in a conference room, which is always a good thing. How are you today?
I'm well, thank you.
We'll get right into it. Last week we talked to DaJuan Gay, who is a former aldermanic candidate, and he's sort of a community activist and air conditioner installer, as he was last night or last summer.
Right.
And it stemmed from a Facebook post that he threw out there that he had gotten pulled over by the Annapolis City Police Department. He and 3 friends were in a car for blowing a stop sign, which we all want to do. I will say that. This is not, he didn't rob a bank or anything like that. And he felt that he was detained above and beyond what he should have been. Felt that the answers that the officers weren't giving him were correct in saying that the computers were down or something like that. And ultimately, he claims that he was fearful for, I don't know whether his life, but he was afraid. And he refers to as his lawyer, which is Nevin Young, who also ran for the mayor of Annapolis. And he lives up the road from where the ultimate stop was. Right. And Nevin had posted on his Facebook page that he had to walk down and get this all settled out and everything else. And I'm not sure exactly what happened, but Nevin came right out and said that it appeared that DaJuan was pulled over for DWB, which is driving while black. Not the best acronym out there.
Right.
And I get there's privacy and stuff like that, but can you shed any light into the specific stop?
Sure. So the officer that stopped him is a net officer who is assigned to Harbor House. She was finishing up a call for service. She was actually cruising the street looking either for a phone or sunglasses or glasses in reference to the previous call. She observed what she believed was a traffic violation. The car didn't stop at a stop sign. She followed the car and eventually made a stop. She interacted with Mr. Gay. He provided license and registration. She went back to the car. And we have something called e-tics, which is electronic tickets. So for your listeners who don't know, we generally don't write the hard citations anymore.
Right.
Can you
do that?
We can.
Okay.
We can still do it. So we go back. It's a system that Maryland State Police set up, and so you can go back and just scan their license, put in a violation. It'll tell you previous stops. It'll tell you different things about the driver, and then we actually have a printer in the car that prints out the citation. You can go back. So in that particular car that Officer Smykel was operating, there was an issue with e-tics, and it's not surprising because these machines are 7, 8, 9 years old.
Okay.
So
and they communicate, I'm presuming, by your radio frequency or cell or something?
Air card,
okay.
Which is not the best way to do it to begin with. So she called for another officer who is Officer Clement Abedingby, who is also assigned to...
I'm impressed that you were able to come up with that name that quickly.
But you saw my eyes roll in the back of my head to try and get it out. So he was there because he's also assigned to the net team in Harbor House. He pulls up. He's got same issues with his equipment. Finally, they call Corporal Cochran, who is a supervisor. He comes over with his equipment, and he's got a trainee with him. So now you've got the original officer that stopped, and then you've got the help that came with the extra computer, and then you've got the supervisor that has the working computer along with the trainee. So now we've got 4 people there. He was never, when I think about driving while black, it's generally some sort of pretext to get into the car or search somebody or,
Right.
We didn't have that here. None of the officers ever asked Mr. Gay to step out of the car, asked to pat him down, asked if he had guns, drugs, weapons, etc. The stop was extended for administrative reasons, and that's kind of the term used in United States versus Rodriguez that Mr. Young wanted to bring to everybody's attention. So that was the delay. I thought when the story was told to me, I thought it was a little excessive in the 30 minutes. Once the second...
When you say excessive, do you mean excessive in the amount of time that it took for you guys to resolve the stop, or excessive in the description of what had possibly transpired? Or
I think I wouldn't have held... I wasn't there at the scene, but I don't think I would have held him there for 30 minutes. Once the second computer didn't work, I would have walked up to the car and said, Mr. Gay, we're having issues with our computer. I'm sorry for the inconvenience. Here's a verbal warning.
Okay.
And let him go.
that's a cop's discretion, right?
Correct. When Officer Schmeichel got back to the third computer, that worked. She printed out the ticket and went up and handed him the citation. And then he was cut loose.
Okay. You talked about that this one officer was initially made the stop, I have had the misfortune of being pulled over twice in Annapolis City, sort of few and far between. And both times I've had multiple officers there as well. The one time it was in the middle of the day on a Sunday afternoon, a quarter mile from my house, and my front license plate had fallen off because the bracket was broken. It was in my window, and they pulled me over, and it was, I'm like, okay, they've got to know that they're looking for a fat 50-year-old guy with white hair that, by the time they stop me, and if that sort of checks out, it's kind of cool. But again, on that stop, there was 4 officers. There was one car with 2 that pulled me over. And then I had the one that came to the window. It was right there in front of Fawcett's on Bay Ridge. Mm-hmm. And the other one, did the whole intimidating cop thing where he comes over to the passenger side, puffs the arms out to the side and sort of has a hand somewhere near his gun. Which, and again, I get, you never know what you're going into.
You don't know who you're stopping.
Right. So, and I had tinted windows in an Expedition, so you don't know what's in the back. I get that.
Right.
There was another car that had come back up behind again. I think there was 2 more cops in that car, and they just sort of hung out and waited until the whole warning was done. I don't even think I got a warning. I think I explained, my license plate's here, it's broken, and I've got it on order with Coons, and it's just not in. Right. And they said, okay, we'll have a good day. But again, there was several people there, and also on the night of the Army-Navy game, very similar to DaJuan Gay, I was rolling down President Street, and coasted through the stop sign at Madison. And as soon as I took that right, I looked out of the corner of my eye, and I saw this little car with no lights parked. I said, I bet you that's A. And as soon as I said A, the lights went on, and I pulled over. And I will say that my interaction, it was an Officer Kess, most polite guy in the world. He said he turned around. He apparently knew not who I was, but knew everything checked out when he came up to my car. As far as, and he said, okay, well, sit tight. I'm going to give you a warning. And he went and he did his warning. I got the little Mylar e-tics or whatever it is, and off I went on. I said, thank you, and be safe. I did have another officer roll up. It was a female officer, and she played this sort of intimidator, if you will. And she's like, well, where are you coming from? Where'd you go? I saw you on Hilltop. I'm like, well, yeah, that's the way I came down. And she was like, well, yeah, I saw you. Something to the effect of, I saw what you did by the rec center. And I'm like, well, I didn't do anything by the rec center. I happened to notice that there were balloons in the window, and I thought it was kind of odd at 10:30 at night. And I'm thinking to myself, well, if you saw me do something, why didn't you pull me over then? But and she says, where are you going? And I said, the post office to get my mail. And she said, well, there's no post office open tonight. And I said, well, yeah, it is. It's open 24/7. And I explained that the homeless people sleep in there sometimes and scare me. And when I don't see them, I think there's a dead body and everything else. And I don't think she believed me. And she tells me, she said, okay, well, you just wait right here. I'm going to be back. And I was like, well, I'm not going anywhere. He's got my license, registration, and insurance, so I'm kind of here for the duration. Right. But I thought that was a little bit intimidating. And then she ultimately, just never came back, and she left. And Officer Kess had come up, and again, he was great with how he handled it. Although I do understand that the one thing that he messed up was that he didn't say to let us know that we were being videotaped. Okay. But that again is something very new for the department with the videotapes on the body-worn cameras. But why, for essentially the same infraction, why do you think my stop may have been so different?
Your stop, how? I mean, are we talking by the number of officers or the end result?
Well, okay, here I am. I'm an older white guy. I was pulled. I cruised through a stop sign. DaJuan says he didn't cruise through a stop sign. I admit I did, but it's same violation. Right. Roughly same time of night. It wasn't late at night and under darkness. My papers seem to be in order. That sounds really right. And I will say one thing I did differently from when I've been stopped in the past, and this is a whole result of this whole, I don't want to say police brutality, but this mistrust and the danger that some people feel, is that my registration insurance was in my glove box, and when Officer Kess was there, I had handed him my license, and he said, can I see your license and registration, or your registration insurance? And I looked at him, I said, well, they're in the glove box, and we had a moment. Where we're looking, and his eyes said, yeah, okay, you can reach in there.
Right. And I think that's a good conversation to have, because it sets the expectations on what you're going to do, what the officer is going to feel comfortable with you doing. And so maybe if it's just Officer Kess standing there and you say, oh, my registration and insurance are in the glove box, maybe he's going to wait for somebody else to pull up and be on that side to get a better view. Again,
depending on the situation, exactly. His own comfort level.
Exactly.
Or you could have it do with your left hand and, whatever.
Right. So let's talk about the number of officers that come on a stop. And that, it varies. it's officer discretion. We dispatch 2 calls or 2 units to every call. So
and your units are all single.
And generally when you see a double, that person, one of those officers is in field training. So
or they wreck their car.
Let's not talk about wrecked cars. So, it depends on when you call out a car stop, unit 1, I have a traffic stop, Maryland tag, whatever it is at this location. Generally somebody is going to get on the radio and say 214, I've got his back or something. Somebody's already starting to roll on that stop. Now, depending on whether there's a large call volume, there might be other people that come up too. I think of it as safety in numbers, not only for the police, but for the citizens as well. Because when we think of misconduct, most generally, unless you're the task force in Baltimore, the misconduct is going to take place individually, right? Because no one is around to see what's going on.
Sure, yeah, I can reach over and slap you aside the head, and it's just you and me when it comes down to it.
Right. So if I have 2 officers there in addition to the other officer, that's a kind of a checks and balances thing that I feel pretty comfortable with, but some people think it's overkill. So I'd rather have more officers and make sure everybody's safe and everybody leaves safely than have one officer and one citizen and something terrible happens.
Okay, so you say there's automatically a dual dispatch, if you will.
Yes.
To the thing. So yes. Theoretically, any traffic stop in the city of Annapolis, in any neighborhood, at any time of the day,
absolutely,
will have another vehicle or another officer en route at some point.
Now, it may be that I walk up to your car. So I call out the car stop. Somebody says that they're going to come and back me up. I walk up to the driver and say,
"Oh, it's Gavin Buckley. That's all right. We're cool. Let's go."
It might be some 16-year-old young woman that, I think I can handle this by myself.
Right.
And it's a minor violation or whatever, and I just might say, unit 1, you can have that other unit disregard. It all depends on the circumstances and the comfort of the officer.
Comfort of the officer. Then, that got the county in trouble with the young women and the solo officers handling it on their own a couple of years ago. I think Chief Cheer had a little bit of a problem with that, but. And the word is tough, but is there any profiling? Obviously you've got certain areas that you realize that there are crimes that are happening, and we've got surrounding public housing, within public housing. I would probably say the upper maybe part of Eastport, if you will, as opposed to the lower part. Certainly downtown Annapolis at midnight to 2 a.m. I would think is probably prime for whether it be vandalism or fights or public drunkenness or whatever. So are you profiling, and that's not the right word I'm looking at, but are you reacting to those neighborhoods with your staff?
Of course we are.
Profiling is a bad word.
We put police where the problems are, where the historic problems are, or where we're noticing crime trends. And that has been in generally the lower income housing areas. So we have police there. I have 2 dedicated officers strictly for Harbor House and Eastport Terrace. They work there 7 days a week, 52 weeks a year.
So is there a cop in Harbor House, Eastport Terrace, pretty much 24/7, or in the general vicinity? And obviously, if something's going down, they're leaving.
It's a focus because, yes. So there's a post officer, but then generally the NET unit, the neighborhood enhancement team, comes in at 4 or 5 and works till 1 or 2 in the morning.
Okay.
Because that's when most of our problems
when the crime in the dark, right? Unlike when HACA hired their private security force to work 9 to 5.
So the idea is you're going to address the problems by putting cops there. Whether I have larceny from autos in West Annapolis or I have discharging and shootings and homicides in Harbor House, that's where I'm going to put the cops. And so that's where they're going to stay until that situation is resolved. So we're not profiling, we're putting cops where the problems are and trying to reduce those issues. And the thing is, I always say that 99% of the people that live in low-income housing are good people and they want to go to work, live their life, be left alone, and the trouble comes in from the outside. And so they want the police there. They expect the police there. And so that's why we're there. We're there because, one, we have problems, and two, they want us there, and three, because they call us and let us know that there's an issue.
Well, that brings up another point. And again, there was a posting on the Eastport Neighborhood Forum. I guess it was on, I don't know whether it may have been New Year's Eve or something like that. And somebody had said, I'm tired of coming home to my neighborhood in public housing and feeling that it's occupied. And people came back and said very bluntly, what the hell do you want?
So
you've screamed for police help because of violence and crime, and whether it's from within or from outsiders, and now you say, well, but figure out how to solve it, but don't be here.
Right. So let's talk about New Year's Eve. When Chief Christopher and I first got here in 2008, our first New Year's Eve, we had 14 discharging calls in and around lower income housing.
And discharging meaning shooting weapons?
Shooting weapons in the air, celebratory fire,
Not fireworks.
Not fireworks.
Okay.
And so what we did was we put officers. So part of our overtime plan for not only downtown but for the neighborhoods is we put 2 officers in each neighborhood to work New Year's Eve. We had 0 discharging calls this year on New Year's Eve. I was working New Year's Eve. I was downtown. There was a big fight on Frederick Douglass. So big that patrol units and the units that were assigned to Harbor House and Eastport Terrace just for the New Year's Eve deployment couldn't handle it. We were pulling people off of Main Street to respond to this fight.
Which had arguably the largest crowd in town.
Right. So that's why we were in the neighborhood in such big numbers, because they weren't, the people were fighting, they weren't following directions. Some people were leaving, but some people were just escalating the problem.
So when you leave on a situation like that, you've got a large fight that's there, you've broken it up, I'm imagining you probably don't have any idea who the hell to arrest at this point, so it's let's just solve this situation and move on. But this is like a pot of spaghetti that's just boiling that it could...
We're not leaving. We are not leaving.
Okay.
Because I've seen it too many times where you've got this big fight, and then people leave, and then they come back with a gun, and then they want to shoot up the neighborhood because they're angry over, somebody spilt a drink on them or something stupid like that.
And that has been the MO in several murders recently here within the city, where it's like, okay, well, I'm pissed off, I'm going to go home, get my gun, come back and shoot you.
Exactly.
Which, is unfortunate there. What training do you guys give your officers as far as racial sensitivity, profiling? What is the training that goes there? Because obviously, certainly in my experience, I had Officer Kess who was very polite and everything else. And I'm a white guy, he's a black guy. And then there was this other officer, and she was a black female that came out, and she seemed a little bit intimidating and whatnot. I mean, I was like, I played by the rules, and I was sort of like a textbook traffic stop. I don't even know the name of the little street, but it was I pulled up far enough so he could make sure he pulled his cruiser behind me so his tail end wasn't hanging out on the cross street.
Right.
The blinkers were on, the windows were down by the time he came up and everything else. But what training do your officers get as far as...
We do in-service training with racial profiling, bias-based policing, sensitivity, cultural diversity. So just about every year there is some sort of class during in-service training that everybody goes through that deals with that issue, whether it's bias-based policing or diversity or something along those lines. What's interesting is for the last 10 years, when we break down car stops by race, we are pretty much right on point with African Americans and whites. So,
meaning what, 50-50?
No. Representative of the community.
Of the population.
So it's about 26% of
African American.
Our car stops are African American, which is consistent with the population.
And 60% or so
45,
for Caucasian.
50, yeah.
And then the rest for the Asian, Hispanic, whatever.
Hispanic, correct.
So
that's an evaluation that we do in the new year, looking back the full year, because we're accredited through the Commission on Accreditation through law enforcement agencies, CALEA. And part of their standards is that, one, you review all your car stops and break it down by race stopped, sex stopped, was the car searched, was the person arrested. So you break all that down. You do an evaluation based on population and make sure that you're somewhere consistent.
Representing the...
Exactly.
Which certainly would keep the, I would think would keep the caucus of African American leaders happy. I mean, because that's their main goal, is whether it be through the judiciary or the police force or the city, or everything should represent the population.
I agree, and the only thing that they've asked about this reporting is that we publish it, that it should be on our website. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if we've done that, but it's something certainly we have nothing to hide. And actually, I'm proud that based on our just a few minutes ago what we said about putting police where the problems are, you would think that number would be so much higher for stops for African Americans than what it is.
If you're putting your officers in primarily African American locations, what do you happen to know what that breakdown works out as far as arrests go, general arrests through the city?
I don't have it off.
Okay.
I don't have arrests.
Walk me through a traffic stop. What goes through? I mean, and you've been a cop for how many years?
30.
If you care to admit. And I mean, where did you get your start? I mean, did you go through say, hey, I want to go to the police academy? Just was out drinking one night and said,
No.
I think I'll be a cop.
No. I grew up in northeast Baltimore City, and my mom was an apartment manager for a complex, and there was 4 cops that lived in our building and 1 cop that lived 2 buildings down, Richard Tracy. And these guys were the best guys. They played softball with us. They took us, back in the day, ferals, you know, and got ice cream and took us to, did all the right things that cops were supposed to do, but they did it off duty. And then Richard Tracy was killed outside of Memorial Stadium doing traffic detail. And that's when I decided I wanted to be a cop.
Okay. And I mean, you came in and you started as a patrolman, or?
I went to the academy and I started as a footman.
Okay, which is a beat cop?
A beat cop.
Walking around with a nightstick and...
Twirling the nightstick,
okay.
Yes. And then I went to a flex unit, and then I went to patrol. So it was probably 4 years before I went to patrol. But I was still doing the same things.
Okay, so you've started at the ground level, and you've worked your way up. Okay,
Yes.
So walk me through a traffic stop. I mean, you just see a car zoom through coast through or zoom through a stop sign, or maybe blow a red light or something like that. What goes through your mind as a cop, and how does that whole, when do you make a decision to ticket, warning, call for backup, sit in your car and wait for backup, or go approach the car? I mean, what are the types of scenarios?
Well, so I see somebody blow a light. I'm going to follow them for a block or two and just make observations, try and determine how many people were in the car. Generally, I'm going to be in a marked car if I'm a police officer.
Right, and you at this point you're also radioing in a license plate, so you know who's the owner of the car or something.
Right. I'm saying, I'm giving my unit number, saying I'm about to stop Maryland Tag, whatever it is, at the corner of wherever I'm going to stop them. Here we say what kind of make of car it is and how many occupants there are in the car.
Do you identify, if you can, the colors of the occupants or the races or anything? It's just sexes, so it's not... I'm stopping a car with 4 males, or
a lot of times you don't know until you get up to the car.
Right. Okay.
So no, we're not stopping somebody and saying, it's a white female, it's a white male, or whatever.
Is that perhaps a problem in an instance where somebody runs? I mean, I've seen descriptions. It's like, it was a 6-foot male, and it's like, well, we don't know black, we don't know white, we don't know facial scars or anything like that. I mean, does that ever prove to be a problem? Where
are you talking about descriptions that the police release, or are you talking about descriptions that police give over the air to other officers?
I guess police description. I mean, if you start to pull a car over and you're not saying that it's filled with 4 females or 2 females, then you get to the stop, you get out of your car, and all of a sudden Thelma and Louise just take off. I mean, it would be nice to know that you're looking for a car with 2 females in it.
Right, and I'm going to give the best descrition of the occupants that I can, because chances are if they're going to take off, then they're going to bail out somewhere, and that'll give people some sort of idea. So if I walk up to the car and I get a quick look, and they take off, then I can give more of a description.
Okay. So you've found a car, you've radioed in, you've told them that you're going to pull them over at the corner of Bay Ridge and Hillsmere or whatever it is, and.
So if it's nighttime, I'm going to turn on all of my lights and blind them. So as I approach the car, that...
Very irritating, I might add.
I know it is. I know it is. And, but the idea is to try and limit their vision. So, I might go, depending on the stop, I might go on the driver's side, or I might kind of surprise them and walk there. They'd be expecting me to come to the driver's side. I might walk around to the passenger side.
Okay.
And then, it's just a general conversation. generally I introduce myself. Hi, I'm still doing traffic stops. Hi, I'm Chief Scott Baker. This stop's being recorded. May I see your license and registration? And then license and registration. I just want to let you know that you were doing 45 in the 25 on West Street. I'll be right back with you. And so I'll go back. I don't carry a citation book. I probably should.
Okay.
But I'll go back and I'll run their license and I'll jot down the information on an index card. Then I'll walk back up to the car and say, hey, just be, slow down a little bit. Here's your license and registration back. Have a good day. And that's generally for me. Now, for a B cop, it could be...
I need to be pulled over by you.
So it all depends on what they observe. Like I said, I'm going to follow them for a block or two before I light them up, just to see any movements, because they're going to recognize a car. So are they dipping stuff under the seat? Are they reaching? I'm watching their movements, because people, obviously when I light people up,
they
get nervous. I get nervous. If I get pulled over and somebody lights me out, I get nervous. But if they're just seeing a car following them without their lights on, what are they doing? So that's a little bit different. And then depending on, by that time, backup is usually there, and we just go through the car stop. Now, when it comes to officer discretion, it's based on a lot of things. It could be based on how that person reacts to being stopped. It could be based on person's driving record, or person has a suspended license. It's a number of factors. We do pedestrian enforcement. We do different kinds of initiatives. A cell phone initiative.
Right, cell phone, seatbelts.
Right. So some of them, I will say, go do this initiative, crosswalk initiative that we did on West Street. I said the idea is not to cite everybody. The idea is to make it educational. So we'll write warnings for everyone. Except I think the last time we did it on West Street, somebody had a suspended license, so they got the ticket for the suspended license and for failing to stop.
Well, you also do the, and I'm going to screw up the name of it, but the DUI tents downtown on the holidays, right. St. Patty's Day and the big holidays.
Know your limit, right?
Right, where you can go out. And again, it's an educational type of a thing. I mean, you're not, congratulations, you blew a .12, here's your citation for public drunkenness.
Right. No, I'd rather educate people, because people are going to understand what we're telling them. When I pull somebody over for texting, one of the things I always say to them, do you know texting is more dangerous than driving while intoxicated? Because it takes up more of your senses, because a lot of people driving will focus when they're drunk, but my attention is drawn over here to my phone. I'm using my fingers, I'm using my eyes, and it's away from the road. So it all depends. I'd rather educate people and have people happy with us, but there are certainly times when officers are going to write citations.
Right. Is this a number that you could release? I mean, what percentage of citations to warnings do you guys, or I guess, is there a national?
I don't know. I wish I knew. That's an interesting
And that's
question.
all. That's just. I mean, so when I'm being pulled over, there's a chance I'm getting a warning. There's a chance that I'm getting, and obviously let's look at. Okay, if I'm doing 90 miles an hour down Forest Drive, I'm getting a ticket. I mean, it's
probably, and it's also going to depend on who stops you, because if a traffic unit stops you, that's their primary function.
Right.
If the post officer stops you, more than likely you're probably getting some sort of warning.
And as we learned earlier, if you're doing 45 down West Street and the chief stops you, you're okay. you're okay. Right. You're golden. Right. What do you think between DaJuan Gay and my experience? Why do you think they were so different? Is it just officer discretion?
I think it's officer discretion, but I also think it's driver perspective, too.
Okay.
I think you certainly have a different perspective because of what's happened in your life and where you grew up, et cetera, et cetera.
And you do, and DaJuan does as well.
Exactly.
How are you guys set for staffing? I know last time we talked that you were understaffed and you had some people that were out, and I know you were lamenting that obviously you could probably use 40 more officers, but that's
not going to happen.
Not realistic. I mean, how are you set now, just sort of as a follow up to the last time we spoke with you? On staffing. I mean, are you adequately staffed, or we need more?
We always need more. So we have 124 positions allocated. We've hired 16 people in 2017, and we've made a net gain of 1.
Okay.
So right now we're at 215. We're doing some hiring. I don't know if you noticed, but the back of our cars now say Annapolis something AnnapolisPolice.gov.
I usually see the front of the cars behind me. That's the.
But now we actually have a website for hiring on all of our cars to try and get that out there. So we are hiring. I have 124 positions. If I could get up to 120 by June, that would be fantastic. People have to understand that about 10% of our number of 114, so about 11 are either on military leave, sick leave, administrative leave, something. Yeah, I just had an officer be activated for the military for 3 years.
Wow,
so,
3 years?
3 years. So that's a position, and God bless him, and I appreciate what he's doing, but that's a position that I can't fill for 3 years.
And in that instance, I mean, he's not being paid, but the position is not. I mean, and you can't hire a cop for 3 years on a 3-year contract or something like that.
But I'm really excited. We're getting ready to do promotions. I just got word yesterday that I've got a little bit more funding. So we're going to do some promotions and hopefully start out 2018 on the right foot.
And get the leadership and
get the leadership, but we've probably been about 2 years since our last promotion. So
I want to say that, I mean, the department has been, and I don't want to say it's been in turmoil, but I mean, you've had a lot of significant changes in the last year. I mean, you had Chief Pristoop, who was here for many years, that was terminated. You had come over and you had to sort of you have a little bit of a different attitude with him as far as the blue shirt versus the white shirt and the accessibility on the field and everything else. Learning a whole different thing as far as management goes. Not that you weren't as major. And then, certainly November threw a little bit of a wrench in the works too with the change in administration in City Hall.
Right.
And as chief, I don't envy you because obviously you're an appointee. But that's
no. What, things are good. I've learned a lot over the last year, and my goal this year, actually this month, is to sit down with every officer for 10 minutes and discuss the agency. Discuss what skills that they can bring to the table that we're not utilizing, and discuss where they see themselves and how we can get them there. So
I want a tip from a consumer, but a citizen.
Sure.
Get your dispatch people working a little bit better on just customer service. I had go back, honestly, when Chief Pristoop was here, there was, if you see something, say something. And, we're not calling 911. And it was 1 o'clock in the morning, 1:30. I was coming back from the ebb tide. There were 2 people walking in the middle of the street with hoodies, very just slow and just sort of sauntering. It was odd. They didn't have dogs.
Right.
And as soon as my headlights crossed across them, they went onto the sidewalk and picked up their pace and left. So I called. I had been, robbed a couple times that year or something like that, but it was,
make it sound so nonchalant.
Well, I mean, at this point, it was. Christ, it was, it was twice in 6 months, but, but I called and I said, there's two guys with hoodies and whatnot, and that was literally, as you mentioned, as we talked earlier, that was the only description I had of them. Right. I mean, I sort of went out on a limb with guys because, I mean, they could have been girls. They could have been 2 dogs on each other's shoulder wearing hoodies. I don't know. But the dispatcher was like, well, so why is that suspicious? I said, it's 1:30. It's in the middle of the street. They changed their pace. It just seemed odd. They didn't have a dog. I didn't recognize them. We're a bedroom community. And she said, well, why is it suspicious that they're wearing hoodies? And that was what it was drilling on. The other time, also, again in my neighborhood, there was a wreck in the last snowstorm a couple weeks ago on Georgetown, where it dead ends down into Wind Whisper. There was a pickup truck that was towing a trailer full of logs and slid on the ice and slid into, of course, it was like a little Toyota Yaris or something like that, so it looked like a can of tuna. And, I called it in. I said, okay, I checked, nobody was injured. I said, you need an officer. You're going to need a tow truck for the one car. I think the pickup truck's fine. And I said I would probably call Public Works out to get some salt down because, people can't get up the hill, and that's the cause of this accident. She said it wasn't even thank. It was like, okay, we'll have an officer out there, and he'll be the one to determine whether we need to get Public Works out. And it was just, like that. It was a simple, hey, thank you for telling us. We'll have somebody on it. Would have been great.
So it's interesting you brought that up because we just put out a new general order on courtesy, and that. Nothing's going to get you more in trouble or more complaints than how you talk to people.
Well, the city itself, and it doesn't matter whether it's the police or the fire or the Public Works or the guys that are doing the permits. I mean, in most basic sense, you're in a customer service business.
Absolutely.
You guys, end up pissed off your customers a little bit more because you're writing them tickets, but that's, but you also make a lot of people happy that are doing it. And I think that's something that the citywide could look for. I know, when Gavin was campaigning, he was saying, we've got to find out. And I think you talked about talking with the different officers and finding out their opinions of the department. I've often thought that doing it citywide, notably within like the permitting section, you find out and say, okay, well, a name is going to come up, or a procedure or something is going to come up that you're going to find is the choke point. And that's where you need to focus and say, this is where we need to massage this and make this better and everything else. But this is interesting. This has been a little bit of an eye-opener. I think it's always good to get like two parts of the story. I mean, at one point, DaJuan had felt that he was, being detained and needlessly.
You're sitting there for half an hour, and it's a long time.
And in traffic stop, that's like 3 days.
Right. Nobody wants to sit there that long, and I understand that. And so what we're going to reinforce is that our equipment isn't always going to work, and we have hard tickets, citation books, and they should be carrying their citation books for instances like this.
To be able to sit there and say, okay, my computer's not working, I'm immediately going to write the hard citation, which makes sense there. Or, maybe there's a policy saying if it's a certain level of a violation to make a consideration of a warning depending on other situations or something along those lines, which does make sense. DaJuan had 3 friends in the car with him. Does that, obviously it doesn't impact whether the officer has made the decision to make the stop, but does that impact whether, if there was something that was going to go bad, and I put this out to him, if he was the kid that shot Terry on President Street and the 3 other guys were in there, as an officer, I certainly don't want to be one against 4 of those guys.
Right, and that's one of the things that I said before is, when I make that stop, I'm letting the dispatcher know how many people are in the car. And so that's certainly a consideration. So can I give you breaking news?
Sure.
I am about to put out a press release, hopefully next week when Corporal Miguez comes back. We are going to develop a Chiefs Advisory Board made up of citizens from Annapolis who will come and meet once a month and discuss the direction of the agency, review our policies, talk about crime in their area, talk about policing in general.
Well, that's fantastic. That's very similar to what the Caucus of African American Leaders had called for. They had called for a
review board.
A review board, which is
a little different, a lot different.
Yeah. Well, no, but you're getting the conversation started, and you're taking the input.
Yes. Absolutely.
From people. The review board obviously had some legal authority to make recommendations or actually carry out, execute something or other. But this, I think it's a great thing. I think that any organization, whether it be police or anything, you operate in your own little bubble and you don't really realize what the outside world is. My life as a cop is here in this little blue car with the fancy lights on top.
Right.
And I think that's great. Now, when is that looking to get established?
Well, we have, part of the process is training. So I'd like to put them through a Citizens Police Academy and do some ride-alongs. And tentatively, we have a Citizens Police Academy scheduled for the beginning of March. So it's got to happen very quickly in order to make that happen.
Okay. So this commission would be in place. Commission?
It's just
committee.
It's just an advisory board.
Advisory board.
Yeah.
Be in place June, July.
I would think. Once the training's done, I would hopefully, I would say by the beginning of April or maybe the end of April. But certainly coming soon.
We can market like everything else does in the city by tourist return or boat show.
So I'm looking forward to it. I think it helps people understand what we do and makes us more transparent. I've said before that if I could put glass up across the whole building.
I think it's great. And I'm presuming they would have some sort of a position on the city department's website, on the police department's website, to the commission as far as who they are and what they're doing.
Yeah, I actually spoke to the Riverdale Park Police Chief last night, and he has a board, and I'd like to go down and sit with them and observe. And he's already got the application, and he's got the bylaws and everything already in place.
Oh, nice.
So, there's no sense in recreating a wheel if somebody already has
good.
it. Yeah.
That's good. Hey, just out of personal curiosity, okay, Annapolis does a ton of events, okay? We've got parades, we got boat shows, we've got, you got the Martin Luther, that will have happened after the time this airs, but the Martin Luther King Parade, you've got certainly the Military Bowl and everything else, the 4th of July and everything else. From a cop's point of view, what are the most challenging types of events for you?
Are the ones that we have very limited time to plan, and a lot of people are going to show up. So if you go back a few years when we had the marches downtown with the Michael Browns and Ferguson.
And again, DaJuan Gay was one of the ones that led that first one.
Right. And you want to make everybody safe. You want to make the citizens safe, the protesters safe, the businesses safe. And when you're only getting 3 days, 2 days notice, and you've got to coordinate all the resources and equipment and everything else, that's probably the most stressful because you don't know what to expect.
Is Boat Show more challenging than the 4th of July parade as opposed to the Military Bowl or to a Navy game even? I mean, I know you've got a huge presence at Navy football games.
We do. Probably the Military Bowl, it's about the resources and how much resources that takes. Because you have the parade and then you have the game and then you have a lot of dignitaries that come to it as well. So that's probably the biggest thing. But we've been doing this for, not me, but retired Sergeant Paul Gibbs has been organizing and writing action plans and everything for so long that it's old hat.
Second nature, right? Yeah, it's just lather, rinse, we got to erase this, and
exactly. Plug in this name to this corner.
All right. Well, I appreciate your time this morning, and I like hearing the other side of the story. Let's find out what's happening under the flashing lights there. We are here at the Annapolis Police Department with Chief Scott Baker, who is police chief for almost a year now.
It'll be. I didn't get appointed until June, but I was.
That's right. You did the acting
in February 5th, 8th, something.
Yeah,
like that.
something like.
It's been a long, strange year.
Well, it only gets longer and stranger. I think that's sort of how it rolls. But thank you very much for your time this morning,
Absolutely.
and I appreciate your insight on this whole on the whole issue.
Very good. Thank you.
Nice interview.
Thank you.
I was editing last night, and as I did, I'm like, I would have made an under-the-breath comment there. I would have made a snarky comment there, but no one was listening to me in my study at 1 a.m. So I had to amuse myself by making these comments and then laughing, and the cats just stared at me.
You should have just inserted them, like you were there.
Oh, I should have done that. Damn it. That would have been hilarious for me. No one else would have found it funny. So I thought it was a good interview.
That's sort of like with all of your jokes.
No, mine are. I'm hilarious. So first of all, I like Chief Baker a lot, and I like DaJuan a lot. They're both really good people, and they're both very earnest. And this is one of those cases that I think that if I overlay the stories, I understand why DaJuan was anxious, and I think a lot of that is, cultural. It's experience, and I probably would feel the same way if I was in DaJuan's shoes. And frankly, listening to Chief, I find what he said completely and totally plausible. So it's not like one of those. I believe in both. I believe that it was a computer error. I believe that because the chief said, I probably would have held them as long as I did,
sure.
But that's up to the officer's discretion, and I get that.
And again, this is a patrol officer as opposed to the chief of police,
right?
The chief can make whatever decision he wants to.
So and here's what he said that I thought that was convincing to me. He said, driving while black, DWB is essentially a pretext in order to get into the car, get people out of the car, search the car. So you pull them over for a taillight, you pull them over for some minor infraction, and then you have everyone out. He said in this case that didn't happen, that they pulled them over, that DaJuan was very polite and very...
Asked for the ID,
right,
and did what cops do.
And
to be honest with you, I mean, DaJuan's talking about a half hour, and I've been pulled over, and I know you've been pulled over, but you never get tickets.
I do not get tickets. And
I've gotten tickets, though, and I would like to know why cops and pharmacists take so damn long to do their job. Rarely will I get out of a stop, and not that I get stopped that much, but a half hour, I'm not squawking about that because that's just typically how they do it.
I don't know. To be honest with you, I have the opposite. Usually, I got pulled over by the city police last summer. So I was going down Cathedral, and the light was yellowish.
Right.
And so I sailed,
brilliant orange.
So I sailed through. And my wife and kids were in the car, and they pulled me over at Cathedral. And so, I do what I always do. I pull over, turn on the dome light, turn off the car, put the keys on the dash, put my hands on 10 and 2, roll down the window. And, so he comes jogging up, and he smiled. He goes, I pulled you over? And I just said, yep. Whoosh. And he laughed, and he just said, just wanted to make sure. But I mean, I admitted it, and I made him feel comfortable. Not that I'm threatening anyway, but every time I get pulled over, to be honest with you, I don't find it to be that lengthy. But what he said was plausible. That it's an old system that doesn't work very well. That they came around, they brought a backup. The backup wasn't working. I totally see that.
I totally buy that. And the city has been bitching about their system for years. But again, I look at my experience in getting tickets, and even a warning. The warning that I got here in Annapolis, it was maybe a 25-minute stop. By the time they checked me out, they checked out my car, made sure it wasn't stolen, made sure my record was not a Speedy Gonzalez record or something like that.
Right.
And he decided to give me a warning. Now, the system was working at that time. He printed it out on the little paper and handed it to me and said, have a good night. But pharmacists are the same thing. You give them a prescription for 30 pills. It's okay, come back in 45 minutes. And what's it, like a minute a pill, dude? So I don't understand that, but it just is. And again, as Baker had said, that DaJuan wasn't step out of the car. If they're looking for something, they're going to pull out all 4 people. They're going to have 4 cops talking to 4 people,
right,
trying to see if anybody's story is a little bit different.
Right. So I'm not saying it doesn't happen. I'm sure it does happen. I'm not sure it happens here. Maybe I'm being naive. Again, we live in. They've always said 2 different Annapolises, and so I think that we're not going to have the experience because of the cultural history that a black person will when they're pulled over. And again, I said I'm never apprehensive about it. But the chief also did say that their traffic stops are when you look at the way they're listed, because I think they're required to list at this race on the traffic stops. The traffic stops are in proportion with the population of the city. So 25% are
African
American. I think
16 to 18 are Latin, Hispanic, and the rest are white or Asian. Or what.
So on the surface you say, okay, those numbers work out. So you say you're not pulled over, and you can make arguments
that would make Carl Snowden happy.
Probably not.
He likes equality.
Yeah. So I don't know. I don't think this does anything to alleviate the impression that African Americans have with the police. I think this is going to be a long, long process that's going to go on for a long time.
Well, it is, but you also got a little bit of a pot stirring too. We've got a sort of a strange area. We've got arguably a racist in the White House.
Get the emails. Probably not.
Yeah. No, I mean, we do. Some of the stuff that President Trump is saying. We've got a lot of people that are fired up, starting from the Women's March last year. You've got all the surges that are running around, all the resistance movements that are running down. You've got Arundel Patriot, which sprung up, and they're very, very far left. The headlines that they wrote, I think they quoted Larry Hogan as saying, "Oh, I didn't realize Baltimore City schools were that screwed up. I didn't," or in that bad a shape. Otherwise, I wouldn't have asked, given the millions of dollars to my developer buddies. And they put that in quotes. And I'm like, okay, well, Hogan didn't say that. So you've got a little bit of pot stirring here.
There's a lot of pot stirring, and it goes on both sides. I'm not doing a false equivalency. This is what I'm getting tired of the divisive groups that are using social media to kind of pull people into their sides and using confirmation bias that they're only picking sites that support their views. Everyone says we won't have an honest dialogue about race or gender or
no, anything, they don't.
And no one wants to have that. They really don't. It takes me back in, what was the Million Man March? That was 95?
95 or 96.
So back then, a lot of women participated in that as well. So a lot of African American women participated, and they were out there. And so they came after the march, to the Bethesda Crab House, which is an institution. It is the Cantlers of Montgomery County. And so the black women were sitting at a table, and there was like 4 of them, and then a group of like 8 or 9 white women came in, typical Bethesda, just kind of in the black clothes and just kind of the x-rays. And they wanted to sit down, and they said, we'd like a table. And they said, we don't have any tables available. And they said, well, could you move those women, pointing to the black women, to that table over there, and we'll move there. It turned into a huge racial incident. It was in the Washington Post. The black women who came in sued for,
as it probably should have been.
Well, I don't know.
They were already seated and eating.
Yeah. So but my point is that if that had happened, and that was a big deal then. If that had happened now, that would be a national incident that would go on for weeks.
Well, it would. And you talk about the distrust that the African American community, I think where this stems from in Annapolis is just that they don't trust HACA, which is,
understandable.
HACA is the majority African American. They don't trust HACA to repair their houses, to give them safe places to live, to police themselves, to be fiscally responsible.
Because everything you just ticked off, they're actually right.
And you also look at what we had before, and I don't want to point fingers at Chief Pristoop because he had, a reason for doing what he did. But, okay, Amy Miguez, you can close your ears. I'm going to bring up the whole Clay Street thing here.
She's going to text me.
But again, this is a level of distrust here. And then you have said it too. What would happen if the police were taking pictures of the St. Mary's kids as opposed to the kids that were hanging out on Clay Street. The shit would hit the fan.
And the argument on the other side would be, but you're not having St. Mary's kids who are accused of criminal activity, and
right.
And in that case, you did. And then so also you're talking about that theoretical level, which is constitutional. I mean, not theoretical, but I mean, illegal search and seizure and everything. So I mean, that's the discussion to have, and those are proper discussions where one person says you would never do this to the white St. Mary's kids, and the other person would say, but the white St. Mary's kids aren't being accused of this, and and they're both viable discussion points. I'm not
right.
saying
I remember that case. There was a group of 5 or 6 young kids. They figured like 9 to 12.
Amy's gonna be so mad at me.
And they were, they were described as African American kids. So why do you go photograph, white kids if you're trying to identify African Americans? I get that, but the thing is that a lot of Annapolis police are coming from Baltimore under the tutelage of Chief Pristoop, who also came from Baltimore City. That's what they're seeing. They're seeing this photographing of the kids. They're seeing some distrust that's going way back when, and they're not seeing this big change in direction that Mike Panelides, when he was mayor, said he wanted to do. I think Scott Baker is a very good chief. I think he's getting into the neighborhood policing, whatever that may be, to whatever. I don't want to say that he's responsible for the reduction in murders, just as I don't want to say that Chief Pristoop was responsible for the high murder rate that we saw 2 years ago. But I think that you're seeing a lot of Baltimore cops. I mean, we've got the former police commissioner of Baltimore as a detective. I'm not the former police, his brother, his son, something. Bielfeld, good cop again. But again, we're very sort of Baltimore cast-offish.
I'm a big fan of the Annapolis police. I'm going to be honest with you. Not just because I don't want the tickets, but because...
That too.
Yeah, but they... let's. I mean, if you look at any of the criticisms that come of our police force here, I don't see any brutality. I mean, aside from our friend on Reddit, but I mean, I'm not seeing any regular or even irregular.
Yeah, there's not a lot of controversy. I mean, there is there is some. I mean, they have broken into wrong houses with a do not knock warrant. They busted into an apartment and, oh, sorry, my bad.
Not uncommon.
That
happened to me in Johnstown, Pennsylvania.
I mean, they've made some false arrests, and it gets adjudicated. But I mean, again,
well, but still, I mean, if you look at police departments in other cities and lay them up against ours, I honestly think that we have a police force that is relatively unsullied. I mean, you can say, well, the crime is actually under control, and like we always said, is that you can have 1 or 2 homicides, and not to downplay it, 1 or 2 homicides, and all of a sudden that is like a double-digit increase, and that's the problem.
I think that goes into Anne Arundel County too. I think Anne Arundel County and Annapolis City, as a whole, are very clean police forces.
I agree.
And I think that there's a perception that they may not be in the African American community.
I think that's going to be the default, and that's what we're talking about right here. It's perception, and they have a reason historically to be distrustful. And if I were in their shoes, I probably would be too. And that's what we're talking about. And that's what I wanted to make sure that our interview with DaJuan last week, and I hope we came off that way, and maybe we weren't successful. I wanted to make sure that we weren't doing that interview to say that, look, there's a problem with the police force and we have to address it, but we had one person who had a perception, and I thought that was an interesting story in and of itself, to say, how can you have one traffic stop and you're going to look at it through 2 different filters? And I want to kind of explore that with DaJuan, and then explore that as well with the chief, to see where the differences lie. And to be honest with you, I'm sympathetic to both stories. I mean, it's not an earth-shaking story. He got pulled over a little too long. He was upset about it. We interviewed him. No one got hurt. No one got hauled out. So and I found that the chief's explanation was completely reasonable and plausible.
Yeah.
But then we go back to DaJuan and say, his mistrust of the police in general, like whether it be here or St. Louis or Seattle, is probably well-founded for different reasons. But I just think in Annapolis, that is something that they're going to have to gain the trust of a community, even though they really didn't do a whole lot on their part to lose the trust. That's societal.
And that's the big problem is facing the police department now.
All right. So anyway, you have some news too, because...
I did. What was it?
It was about Alexa.
Yeah.
I think it's a big deal.
My if you have an Alexa, if you have an Echo, Amazon Echo, I guess is the formal term, and you listen to our Annapolis Daily News Brief, which you should. It comes out at 7 a.m. every morning. It is now considered a skill. Ooh. Yeah. And what you can do is you just go through your app, you search for Ion Annapolis, it'll come there, you enable the skill. So anytime you just say, hey, Alexa, play the Ion Annapolis Daily News Brief, it'll play you the most current one. They're about 10 minutes long. They've got high school sports. They've got local weather forecasted right here. Yeah,
so it's back up. So you go to your Alexa app. So if you have an Alexa, you have an app. You go in there and you go into settings and you go into skills. And when you get into skills, you enable the Ion Annapolis.
Right. You have to probably search for it.
You have to search for it, but it's worth it. And here's why. And this is why John and I were arguing over text. I said, because I don't want to download it, get in the car, and I have an old car, so I have to plug it in. I've got to play it, and I don't want to do that. I would rather listen to John's dulcet tones as I'm brushing my teeth and getting dressed, because it takes me
this is a vision I don't want to hear.
10 minutes to do that. And his morning briefing is around 10 minutes. So by the time I get out of the shower, I go to my Alexa and I say, play Stupid John's thing. And I listen to it for 10 minutes. By the time I'm getting in my car, I'm ready for the day.
And you can also put it into your flash briefing, which is where you can put different news.
I love that thing.
News things in there as well. So, I mean, you could put, local news, regional news, national news.
So you say Alexa, play my flash briefing, and all of a sudden you have
it might have Ion Annapolis, it might have
Wall Street Journal,
MAR,
CNN, all
AP,
that stuff. Yeah. So
Financial Times.
I think
whatever.
that's exciting.
Okay.
And also because you poo-pooed me and I kept texting you and you finally did it. It was like the one time you ever listened to me.
Well, that's how this podcast got started. You just bugged me enough, and I said, fine, F it.
I said, John, I need you to do all the work.
Let's just do the damn thing.
Right. So.
Shut them up.
All right. So
what are we doing next week?
We'll discuss that after we get
off. We'll back that bus right up, Tim.
Yeah, right. Planning? Yes. So other than that, find us on Facebook. We have a group. We have a page. Find us on Twitter. We're at MD Crabs Podcast. Find us on YouTube. Subscribe to us on Apple. Give us the ratings. Give us the reviews. Listen to
the ratings.
Else.
Let me jump back. Jump on give us the ratings. The ratings are very important.
I like the reviews. So if I like seeing my name.
If you're listening to this.
Except it's Tim Talks Too Much, which I do.
If you're listening to this, go to Apple Podcast and just give us a rating, please. And if you got a little bit of extra time, throw in a review there. But it's just a couple clicks, and it's very important for us.
And if your review doesn't include my name and a nice thing, I'm going to sulk for the next week, and John has to put up with that.
It happens.
All the time.
This has been the Maryland Crabs Podcast with Tim Hamilton and John Fernay. Sure to follow them at all the regular places, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and online at themarylandcrabs.com. Take a moment to rate us on iTunes. Now, get the hell out of my kitchen. Seriously, go!
You're still here? It's over. Go home. Go.